Fear felt like a cold stone in Felicity Adams' stomach. She stood on the auction block, a piece of property waiting for a price. The sun beat down on the dusty Colorado town square, hot and merciless. It was 1876, and at 22 years old, her life was over. Or maybe it was just beginning. Her father's death had left her with nothing but his debts. And in a town like Wildwood, debts were paid one way or another. The auctioneer's voice boomed, a hammer blow with every word. 6 months of domestic service, a fine, hard-working girl, who'll start the bidding at $5. A sea of faces stared back at her. Rough men, their eyes filled with a hunger that had nothing to do with a clean house. A saloon owner with a greasy beard and a cruel smile. A rancher whose hands looked big enough to crush a skull. This wasn't about housekeeping. This was about ownership. The bidding started. $5, 10, 20. Each bid was a nail in her coffin. The saloon owner, a man named Harker, was winning. Felicity's blood ran cold. She knew the stories about the girls who worked for Harker. They didn't last long. $25, the auctioneer shouted. Going once, going twice. $100. The voice cut through the crowd like a razor. It was low, steady, and cold as a grave. The town square fell silent. Every head turned. A man stepped forward. He was tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, a worn leather vest, a dark hat pulled low, and on his chest a star-shaped badge glittered with cold authority. Sheriff Blake Turner. The auctioneer stammered, his eyes wide. Won $100 from the sheriff. Going once, twice, sold. The gavel cracked, sealing her fate. Sheriff Turner walked to the platform. He didn't smile. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at her. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, and they held no warmth, no pity. They held calculation. He paid the auction master in crisp bills, then turned to Felicity. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked at her, a long, unreadable stare that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an order. As she followed him through the silent, staring crowd, a single terrifying question burned in her mind. Had she just been saved? Or had she just been bought by a different kind of monster? The walk to the sheriff's house was the longest of Felicity's life. Every whisper from the townsfolk felt like a whip at her back. Blake Turner didn't say a word. He just walked, his stride long and sure, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol. He wasn't protecting her. He was leading her, like a prisoner. His house was at the edge of town, neat and plain, with a porch that creaked under his heavy boots. Inside it was clean, sparse, and cold. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a waiting room. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a hard wooden chair at the kitchen table. She sat. Her hands were folded in her lap, trembling. He stood across from her, his shadow falling over the table, swallowing her in darkness. "I don't understand," she finally whispered, her voice tight. "Why did you do that? Why pay so much?" He pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket. The contract. He slid it across the table toward her. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Adams." She looked at the paper, then back at him. "I'll work. I'll cook. I'll clean. I'll do whatever you need." A strange, humorless smile touched his lips. "I don't need a housekeeper." Her heart began to pound, a frantic, trapped bird against her ribs. "Then what? What do you need?" He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. The winter sky blue had turned to stone. "I need a wife." The word hit her like a physical blow. "Wife?" She stared at him, speechless, her mind reeling. He had bought her to be his wife. "The contract is for domestic service," she stammered, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Contracts can be amended, he said, his voice dangerously soft. This town respects paper, law. I need a wife. You need a home. It's a practical arrangement. Practical. The same word her father's creditors had used when they sold off her family's farm. The same word the town council used when they put her on that auction block. It was a word men used to justify cruelty. I won't, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I won't be forced. You think you have a choice? He asked, the question hanging in the cold air. But then he did something she didn't expect. He sat down. The towering, intimidating figure suddenly seemed tired. Look, he said, running a hand over his face. This isn't what you think. My sister, Martha, she lives here. She's sick, very sick. The sudden shift in his tone threw her off. Sick. The doctor gives her a year, maybe less. He looked away, out the window, at nothing. Our father left us this house, this land. But there's a clause in his will, an old stupid clause. If I'm not married by my 30th birthday, the property goes to the church. My birthday is in 2 months. The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture that was no less terrifying, but far more desperate. You need to be married to keep your home, she whispered, for your sister. He nodded, his gaze still fixed on the window. I can't lose this house. It's all she has left. It's all I can give her. He finally looked back at her, and the hardness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability that stunned her. I'm not asking for a real marriage. Just your name on a piece of paper. A 6-month arrangement, just like the contract says. After that, you're free. I'll give you enough money to start a new life, anywhere you want. He was offering her a cage, but it was a gilded one, a prison with an escape hatch. It was still a lie, a transaction. But it was a lie meant to save someone he loved. She thought of Harker's greasy smile. She thought of the cold ground. She thought of having nowhere to go, no one to turn to. And she made her choice. The wedding was a quiet, sterile affair. A traveling judge, a few scribbled signatures. Martha, pale and thin but with her brother's fierce eyes, stood as a witness. She smiled at Felicity, a sad, knowing smile. That night, Felicity lay in her small, cold bed, listening to the sounds of the house. She could hear Martha coughing in the next room. She could hear Blake pacing downstairs, a restless ghost in his own home. She had a new name, a roof over her head. But she was more trapped than ever. She had traded one auction block for another, sold into a marriage of convenience to a man who was a complete stranger. A man who looked at her not with love, but with the grim determination of a man doing whatever it takes to hold his world together. And she was now a part of that world. A world built on secrets, sickness, and a ticking clock. Life in the Turner house was a careful dance. Felicity cooked and cleaned, earning the money Blake paid her weekly without fail. Martha, though weak, was a gentle presence, teaching Felicity the rhythms of the house, sharing stories of her and Blake's childhood. She spoke of a happier time, before the war, before their parents died, before Blake built a wall around his heart. Blake was a shadow. He was gone before sunrise and returned long after dark. He ate the meals Felicity left for him in silence. They were husband and wife on paper, but strangers under the same roof. The arrangement was working. It was cold, but it was safe. But safety in Wildwood was a fragile thing. One afternoon, Felicity was in the garden when Sam Harker rode by. He didn't stop. He just slowed his horse, his eyes raking over her, a possessive, ugly sneer on his face. He tipped his hat in a mocking gesture and rode on. A chill went down her spine. He hadn't forgotten. That night, Blake came home with a darkness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. There was a fire at the old Miller farm, he said to Martha, his voice tight. The whole barn burned to the ground. Was anyone hurt? Martha asked, her hand flying to her mouth. No, but the Millers are ruined. They'll have to sell. Blake's gaze flickered to Felicity. They just refused an offer on their land. From Sam Harker. The name hung in the air like poison. Felicity felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. A message about what happened to people who got in Harker's way. A few days later, a package arrived for Felicity. It was a bolt of fine blue calico fabric, the kind she could never afford. There was no note. When she asked Blake about it, he just shrugged. A wedding gift, I suppose. But his eyes wouldn't meet hers. She knew he had bought it. It was a gesture of kindness, but it felt like something else. It felt like a payment. Another link in the chain of their transaction. It was Martha who started to unravel the truth. Her good days were becoming rarer, her coughing fits more violent. One afternoon, Felicity found her in the parlor, staring into the cold fireplace, a faded photograph in her hand. That was our mother, Martha said, her voice a faint whisper. She looked at Felicity, her eyes sharp and clear despite her illness. Blake thinks he can control everything. He thinks he can buy safety, build walls, keep the wolves at bay. But he can't. She coughed, a dry, racking sound. He doesn't just want to save this house for me, Felicity. He wants to save it from the man who destroyed our family. Felicity's breath caught. What do you mean? The man who drove my father to financial ruin, Martha said, her voice laced with an old, cold anger. The man who bought up our farm in Kansas for pennies on the dollar after he was gone. The man Blake swore he'd find one day. She looked at Felicity, her gaze intense. His name was Sam Harker. The world tilted. Harker wasn't just a local bully. He was the ghost from Blake's past. The reason for the walls around his heart. Blake hadn't just come to Wildwood to be a sheriff. He had come for revenge. And Felicity, she realized with a sickening lurch, wasn't just a pawn in his plan to save his sister. She was a pawn in a much older, much deadlier game. His bid at the auction wasn't just about saving her from Harker. It was about taking something from Harker. The same way Harker had taken everything from him. Suddenly, Blake's kindness, his quiet protection, his gift of blue fabric, it all seemed tainted, twisted into something dark and calculated. She was just another move on his chessboard. That night she confronted him. She found him in the barn, cleaning his rifle, the lamplight casting his face in hard shadows. Your sister told me about Kansas, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. She told me about Harker. Blake didn't stop what he was doing. His hands remained steady. Martha talks too much. Is it true? Is that why you're here? To get revenge? He finally looked up, and the coldness in his eyes was so absolute it made her take a step back. This has nothing to do with you, Felicity. Nothing to do with me, she cried, her voice rising. You bought me. You married me. You put me in the middle of your war with him without a single word of truth. I kept you safe, he growled, standing up, his tall frame looming over her. You used me, she shot back. You used me to hurt him. What was your plan, Sheriff? To flaunt your new wife in his face, to show him you could take something he wanted. He was silent. His silence was her answer. The betrayal was so sharp, so complete, it stole the air from her lungs. She had thought he was a good man, a kind man. But he was just like all the others, using her for his own purposes. I'm leaving, she said, her voice a dead whisper. Our arrangement is over. She turned to walk away, but his hand shot out, grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron. No, he said, his voice a low, dangerous command. You're not going anywhere. For the first time since she'd met him, Felicity was truly afraid of Blake Turner. The savior was gone, and in his place stood a man consumed by a decade-old hatred, a man who would let nothing and no one stand in his way. The illusion of safety shattered. The house was a prison again, but this time the warden wasn't a stranger. He was her husband. Blake's grip on her arm was a stark reminder of her powerlessness. "The contract is valid for 6 months," he said, his voice cold as a winter river. "You will stay." He let her go, but the threat lingered in the air. He wasn't the kind man she'd started to fall for. He was a stranger again, a man driven by a darkness she couldn't comprehend. She retreated to her room, the bolt on the door, a flimsy shield against the man in the next room. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house was him. Every shadow was his anger. The next morning, the tension was a physical thing. Martha stayed in her room, her coughing echoing through the silent house. Blake was gone before dawn. Felicity felt trapped, isolated. She considered running, but where would she go? Harker was out there. Blake was in here. She was caught between two fires. She needed to understand what had really happened to her father. His debts hadn't made sense. He was a careful man. She went into town, telling Martha she was getting supplies. Her real destination was the office of the town registrar. She found the record of her father's farm, the foreclosure notice. And she found the name of the bank that held the loan. It wasn't the main bank in town. It was a smaller, private lender. The lender's name was Sam Harker. Her father hadn't just owed money. He had owed money to him. The story of bad luck and a poor harvest was a lie. This was something else. This was a trap that had been laid long before she ever stood on that auction block. Harker had been after their land. The auction wasn't a solution to her debt. It was the final step in his plan to own her, just as he had owned her father. She returned to the house, her mind racing. Blake knew. He must have known. His investigation into Harker would have uncovered the loans. He knew she was Harker's target from the very beginning. His rescue was a calculated move to seize a key piece in his own game. That night, Blake returned late, a fresh cut on his cheek and the smell of whiskey on his breath. "There was a fight at the saloon," he said, his voice slurred just enough to betray him. "Harker's men." "Are you all right?" she asked, her anger warring with a flicker of concern. "He's pushing," Blake muttered, more to himself than to her. "He knows I'm getting close. He's trying to get me to make a mistake." He looked at her then, his eyes unfocused. "He asked about you." Felicity's blood ran cold. "What did he say?" He said he still considers you his property." Blake slammed his fist on the table, making the lantern jump. "He won't have you. I'll kill him first." The raw violence in his voice terrified her. This wasn't about justice. This was a blood feud, and she was standing in the crossfire. The next day, she found it, a loose floorboard in Blake's study. She didn't know why she looked there. A gut feeling, a desperate need for truth. Beneath the board was a small, locked metal box. She pried it open with a fireplace poker. Inside were letters. Letters between Blake and a man she didn't know. They were filled with coded language, but she could piece it together. Reports, timelines, details of Harker's operations, rustling, arson, extortion. And then she saw her own name. The Adams girl is the key. Her father was skimming from Harker. He found something. Proof. Harker killed him for it, disguised it as a fever. The proof has to be on that farm. Once I have the girl, she'll lead me to it. It was all there. A cold, calculated plan. Her father wasn't just in debt. He'd been one of Harker's men, a bookkeeper who got greedy and then got dead. Harker had manufactured the debt to get the farm, to find whatever proof her father had hidden. And Blake. Blake had known all of it. He hadn't saved her out of kindness. He had acquired her, an asset in his investigation, a tool to be used. The betrayal was absolute. It hollowed her out, leaving nothing but ice and fury. She put the letters back, closed the box, replaced the floorboard. She moved like a ghost, her face a mask of stone. When Blake came home that evening, she was waiting for him. She had a fire going in the hearth. Supper was on the table. She even smiled at him. "You look tired," she said, her voice soft. He seemed surprised by her gentleness. "Long day," he admitted, sitting down. She served him his plate. "I found something, Blake, in my father's old trunk. A ledger. It's full of numbers, I think. I think it's what Harker was looking for." His eyes lit up. The mask of the quiet sheriff fell away, revealing the hunter beneath. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice sharp with excitement. "I hid it," she said, her smile never wavering. "Somewhere safe. I'll take you there. Tomorrow." He stared at her, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes, but his desire for the proof, for the final piece of his puzzle, was stronger. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow." That night she didn't sleep in her own bed. She crept into Martha's room, where his sister lay in a feverish sleep. She sat in a chair in the corner, holding Blake's shotgun, and waited for the dawn. She was done being a pawn. She was done being a victim. She was going to end this. Her way. The dawn broke cold and gray. Felicity led Blake out of the house, not toward the old farm, but up into the rocky hills behind the town. The air was thin, the wind sharp. "It's a strange place to hide something," Blake said, his eyes scanning the terrain, his hand never far from his gun. "My father taught me all the secret places," she said, her voice flat. "The places no one would ever think to look." She led him to the edge of an old, abandoned quarry, a sheer drop of 100 feet to the jagged rocks below. He hid it in a small cave, just down that ledge. Blake peered over the edge. "It's dangerous." "The truth usually is," she said. She watched him as he carefully began to make his way down the narrow, treacherous path. He was so focused on his goal, on the final piece of his vengeance, that he didn't see the shift in her. He didn't see the cold fury that had replaced her fear. When he was halfway down, perched precariously on the ledge, she spoke. Her voice rang out, sharp and clear in the morning air. "There is no ledger, Blake." He froze. He turned slowly, his boots scraping on the loose rock. He looked up at her, confusion warring with dawning horror on his face. "I read your letters," she said, her voice like ice. "I know everything. About my father, about your plan, about how you used me." His face paled. "Felicity, it's not what you think. I had to protect you. Protect me." She let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "You put me in a cage and called it a sanctuary. You lied to me from the moment you saw me." "I was trying to get justice for my family," he shouted, his voice echoing in the quarry. "For your father." "You were trying to settle a score," she shot back. "And you didn't care who you had to use to do it. You're no better than him, Blake. You're just a different kind of monster." Tears streamed down her face now, hot and angry. "I actually thought, I started to believe." She couldn't finish. The betrayal was too raw. "My feelings for you are real," he said, his voice desperate. He took a step toward her, back up the path. "Stay where you are," she screamed, snatching up a loose rock. "It was all a lie, all of it." "It wasn't," he pleaded. "It started that way, but it changed. I love you, Felicity." His words, which she had longed to hear, now felt like poison. She didn't believe him. She couldn't. From the trail below, a third voice cut in, laced with smug amusement. "Well, isn't this a touching scene?" They both looked down. Sam Harker stood at the bottom of the quarry, a rifle cradled in his arms. He wasn't alone. 3 of his men were with him. They had followed them. Looks like your little plan fell apart, Sheriff, Harker sneered. And you brought the girl right to me. I have to thank you for that. He raised his rifle, aiming not at Blake, but at Felicity. Now tell me where the book is, little girl, or your sheriff gets a bullet. They were trapped. Blake on the ledge, Felicity at the top, and Harker's men below. There was no escape. Blake looked from Harker's rifle to Felicity's tear-streaked, furious face. He had made a terrible mistake. His long-planned vengeance had led them all to the edge of a cliff. He had tried to control the game, but the game had just turned on him, and the price for his lies was about to be paid in blood. The world narrowed to the edge of that cliff. Harker's rifle was a black dot aimed at Felicity's heart. Blake was trapped on the ledge, his own gun useless from this angle. I don't have it, Felicity screamed at Harker, her voice raw with desperation. There is no book, Harker laughed, a harsh grating sound. Your father was a thief, but he wasn't a fool. He wouldn't have crossed me without an insurance policy. Now where is it? Blake's mind raced. He saw a flicker of movement on the ridge above the quarry, a glint of sunlight on metal. Someone else was here, watching. It's over, Harker, Blake called down, trying to buy time. Even if you kill us, you'll hang. Not if no one finds the bodies, Harker sneered. Last chance, girl. Just as he spoke, a single shot cracked from the ridge. It wasn't aimed at Harker. It hit the rock face just beside his head, sending stone chips flying. Harker's men spun around, firing wildly towards the top of the cliff. Blake didn't waste the opportunity. He scrambled up the path toward Felicity. We have to move, he yelled, grabbing her hand. Another volley of shots echoed from above. It was a single shooter, moving fast, firing with deadly accuracy. 2 of Harker's men went down. Harker, roaring with rage, turned his rifle toward the ridge and fired back. Blake pulled Felicity away from the edge, back toward the trees. Who is that? She gasped. I don't know, Blake said, his face grim. But they just saved our lives. They scrambled through the dense woods, branches tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the sound of the gunfight faded, replaced by shouts, and then an eerie silence. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of town, their lungs burning. They took refuge in the livery stable, hiding in the hayloft. From the small window, they could see the town. It was quiet. Too quiet. He'll come for us, Felicity whispered, her anger at Blake momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer terror. He'll tear the town apart to find us. I know, Blake said. He looked at her, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes filled with a desperate regret. Felicity, I was wrong. I was so consumed by what Harker did to my family, I became him. I saw you as a way to get to him. But it changed. Somewhere along the way, standing in my own kitchen watching you knead bread, it all changed. I fell in love with you. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the sting of his betrayal was too fresh. Before she could answer, the stable doors creaked open. They both froze. It was Martha. Her face was pale, and she was leaning heavily on a cane. I saw the riders leave town, she said, her voice a thin whisper. I knew he'd make his move. You shouldn't be out of bed, Blake said, moving to help her. She waved him away. There's no time. Blake, you have to listen to me. There's more you don't know. About Felicity's father. A rider appeared at the stable door, not Harker. It was the shooter from the ridge. A figure cloaked in a dusty poncho, a wide-brimmed hat hiding their face. The figure dismounted and stepped into the stable, and pulled back the hat. It was a woman. Her face was weathered, a long scar cutting across one cheek, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. I took care of Harker, she said, her voice calm and steady. He won't be bothering anyone again. She looked from Blake to Felicity, then finally to Martha. "It's been a long time, sister." Martha let out a sob. "I thought you were dead." Blake stared, his mind struggling to catch up. He knew that face. He hadn't seen it in 15 years. It was his older sister, the one he thought had died after being disgraced and driven out of Kansas, the one Harker's family had ruined. "What? How?" Blake stammered. "I survived," his sister said, her voice hard. "I learned to fight. I've been tracking Harker for years, waiting for my chance. When I heard he'd settled in Wildwood and that you were the sheriff here, I came." She looked at Felicity. "And then I saw you, and I saw him making the same mistakes all over again, using an innocent woman in his own war." The truth was a tangled, painful mess. Blake's quest for justice had been mirrored by his sister's quest for revenge. They were two sides of the same broken coin. "Felicity," Martha said, her voice urgent as she pulled a yellowed letter from her pocket. "This is from your father. He gave it to me the day before he died. He knew Harker was coming for him. He made me promise to give it to you if anything happened." Felicity took the letter with trembling hands. It was her father's handwriting. "My dearest Felicity," it began. "If you are reading this, Harker has made good on his threats. I got involved in something terrible, thinking I could provide for you. I was wrong. I kept a second ledger, a true one, with all his crimes. It's not on the farm. It's in the one place he would never look, the place your mother loved, our secret place, the old willow tree by the creek. It was all there, the final piece of the puzzle. Her father hadn't been a simple victim. He had been a man trapped, who had tried to do the right thing in the end. And Blake had been telling a version of the true story all along. His methods were wrong, born of pain and obsession. But his heart, maybe his heart was in the right place after all. The ledger was their only leverage now. With Harker dead, his criminal enterprise would fall apart, but the proof in that book could protect the town from whatever came next. It could give them all a fresh start. They rode back to the old farm, a strange, broken family united by a common cause. They found the ledger, just as her father had said. When they returned to Wildwood, the town was in chaos. With Harker gone, his men had scattered. The mayor was trying to restore order. Blake, with the ledger in hand, took control. He didn't do it with guns. He did it with the truth. He laid out Harker's crimes, using the ledger as undeniable proof. He confessed his own role, his own vendetta. He didn't make excuses. In the end, it was Felicity who spoke to the crowd. "We've all been living with ghosts," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Men like Harker thrive in the shadows, in our fear, but we're done being afraid." The healing of Wildwood began that day. Blake resigned as sheriff, saying the town needed a lawman who wasn't driven by his own past. But the town council refused his resignation. They had seen the man he truly was, not a hero but a good man who had lost his way and found it again. His older sister didn't stay long. Her war was over. She and Blake made their peace, two survivors who had finally laid their family's ghosts to rest. Weeks later, Felicity stood with Blake on the porch of his house. It was a new beginning, not the one she had imagined, but a real one. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I already have," she said. "We were both just trying to survive. Now maybe we can learn how to live." He took her hand. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a promise of safety. It was just a beginning, a real one. In a world full of lies, sometimes the most courageous act is to believe in a second chance. They had both been through the fire, and they had come out the other side, not unscathed, but together. And that was a truth worth fighting for. If this story of redemption and hard-won love moved you, show some support by hitting that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the incredible tales of justice we have coming your way.